Hello, Wine World. Welcome back to session 2 of Silicon Valley Bank's 2020 State of the Wine Industry Videocast. We appreciate you coming. Last week you heard a lot of ideas about things that we might be able to do and places that were kind of holes and potholes in the industry, things that we need to fix. And we're going to pick up pretty much right where we left off, but I have to read this stuff again. I always forget these housekeeping notes. One of these days I'll remember them. But at the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets that you can use. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can click on the Q&A icon. And the Q&A icon is for the panel itself. You'll be able to address questions to the panel at that point. The chat panel, on the other hand, is for cross-communication between you and the other participants. So feel free at any time to use either of those. If you have a problem with anything technically, then you can again use that Q&A session or Q&A button, and somebody will pick that up for you. It's a good time though on the group chat. If you're logged in, please put your name in there and winery or place you're from. If you want to talk about the location you're from, that's fine as well. And I think that's it for. I gotta introduce my panel here. I got Amy Hoops, who's the CEO of Wente Winery. Juliana Colangelo is one of the partners in Colangelo Partners. I probably just promoted her, but her dad will be okay with it.
You promoted me too, in all fairness. I'm the president.
Okay. And then I have the Doctor of Digital, Paul Mabray, who's CEO of Emetry, or demigod, I don't know. Maybe let's give everybody a promotion.
Wow, that's a real promotion.
Yeah. So we're going to start right up by talking about slide 2. So industry sentiment. This was an interesting slide to me. It comes from the survey, and again, as I said last week, I appreciate everybody and their participation on the survey. We can't get this data without your help. So people are always asking, what is it that people in the industry think? How are they feeling? And so this is a good explanation of that. We break it into a few different segments, and it's a little bit like the Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index. It's the way it's calculated. The one on the far right of your screen is the overall sentiment, and it turned decidedly pessimistic this year. Last year it was 1% pessimistic. This year it's 46.3% pessimistic. So that's a pretty big change. The economy ends up being one of the larger changes from being viewed actually increasingly positive through 2019 until we got 2018 until we got to 2019. Now that shows up as negative. What that says is that the consumer feels the economy is actually having more of a negative impact than a positive impact in the wine business. Despite everything else that you hear out there on Wall Street, the Dow at record levels, good GDP, this is the way the wine industry is feeling. Labor is obviously a big issue. And foreign competition, surprisingly, is becoming less of a problem. This was before, by the way, the fires in Northern California and Sonoma, and this was before the tariffs. So that's not the issue. But when you look at substitutes are an issue, and so the industry is aware that substitutes are a problem, and so that's the biggest negative trending piece of this index. So the industry is pessimistic, and my own sense of things is that until we recognize the problems, we can't find solutions. We talked about many of these same things last year, and I don't know that the industry was ready to receive the information that I was handing out. I was labeled a doom and gloomer by a lot of people. And sadly, the predictions that I made where I was wrong is I was too optimistic on negative predictions that actually were even more negative than I had believed. One example would be the amount of acreage that wasn't picked last year. We ended up with in every single county, every single region, we ended up, probably with the exception of Willamette Valley, we ended up with vines or grapes that were unpicked. It's a little bit different than we're used to. So pull up slide 3 if we can. And this is a self-reported thing on financial health. And so year to year, you can see on the left side of the screen, you can see that there's an increasing level of people that are reporting weaker condition. And on the right side of the screen, generally there is a decreasing number of people that are reporting the good conditions. So there's still good conditions, but it's not quite where we want to be. When we move to the next slide, which is how was your year, we end up with I think an interesting view. So this isn't about financial good. This is just a general statement. How was your year? The left side is one of the most difficult. Right side is the best year in history. And so it's interesting to me when I look at this. I see 24% with the best year in history, record years, against the backdrop of all this negativism and the other slide on the optimism of the industry. So a chunk of the industry is doing quite well. I've dug into the numbers a little bit in our peer group analysis. So this is our customers and prospects. Silicon Valley Bank has roughly 450 wineries that we bank, and we have prospects that we look at from time to time as well, of course. And we take those financial statements. We're able to analyze them and in general ways get a feel for what's happening in the market. So when I separate sales growth rate of family wineries in this database just into quartiles, lower and upper, lower being in this case quartile 1, upper being quartile 4, what I discover is roughly 25% of the industry has a sales growth rate of minus 7.8%. And when you go to the other side, we have sales growth that's about 22%. So that sounds pretty good. 22% growth sounds really good. And in fact, so we got about 25% of the industry not doing very well and 75% that's doing okay, which is why it's difficult to look at averages all the time. If you look at averages and you just look at the optimistic, pessimistic side, you might think that the sky is falling. Mm-hmm. And I would say it's cloudy and maybe it's sprinkling. But we can still find an umbrella, and that's the point of the discussion. Lot of questions that we've received about land values and what's happening with vineyards. We don't have any land experts this time, but we do have, as it turns out, an intrepid reporter in the field. And why don't we go to that intrepid reporter and see what he has to say about land values. Welcome to Napa Valley at Silicon Valley Bank's offices here. I have with me Tony Correa, who's the world's foremost vineyard appraiser. At least that's what he tells me. So I thought it'd be a good time to have Tony come in and talk about what's happening with land prices under the current dynamics of the market. Tony, what is happening with land price?
Well, that's a very good question because we're not seeing a lot of sales activity. This last year has been fairly slow on the vineyard markets, and so it's hard to tell where the markets are if we don't see the benchmark transactions that can guide us along that path.
Is price going up?
Price for the very best top quality vineyards is still strong and will go up if they're competitive bids.
And what about B and C?
B and C, not so much. B properties will sell at the right price. C properties, there's not a lot of folks interested in a C property today with the grape market the way it is.
Yeah. And another model, what about the small house with a small vineyard with the small brand? Lots of those.
Well, there's more that are large houses with small vineyards and small brands, yeah. And those are most of those are all purely lifestyle deals, and so that's a function of the general market for lifestyle homes. They've been very popular for the last several years, both Napa and Sonoma. But those are not driven by the economics of wine production, because typically those are very small, a couple thousand cases of wine, and most of that is sold to family and friends, et cetera, direct to consumer, but not really significant wine production.
And today we're seeing volume declines in, depends on who you ask, but most will say we're in the middle of some volume declines, and we've never really seen this in the fine wine section, especially up in the North Coast, maybe going back to the 80s perhaps, you might get there, but what do you see in terms of vineyard removals in the state of California right now?
Well, we're seeing, I think, quite a lot of vineyard removals throughout the state, certainly in the Central Valley, and that some of those are old, tired vineyards, and some of them just aren't viable with the grape pricing the way it is. Up and down the coast, we're seeing the same thing. There's quite a lot of vineyard removals either happening or planned for this next year. And the big question becomes, are those going to be replanted to vineyards, or are they going to go to an alternative crop? But I think the bottom line is, if wine sales are declining, then we'll have to decrease our production to come into line so we can achieve balance again.
But those removals are happening.
The removals are absolutely happening. You can see them if you drive up and down the coast, all the way from the north, all the way through the south.
Do you have an idea about how long it would take for us to find a natural point where buyers and sellers are on equal footing?
I think it'll start to happen. I think this next year is going to be a challenge, but there's a lot of buyers out there who are waiting for the right opportunities, and I think we'll start to see some activity later in the spring, and then I think in 2022 you'll see a return to more of a balanced market.
And last question, what about funds? Do you see funds out there that are starting to look at trying to pool money to maybe come in and pick up assets?
There's an abundance of funds, we call them institutional type investment funds, and there's an abundance of those that are very large ones that are chasing agricultural land in general. And of course, if you're going to be in ag land, and the wine grapes are the sexiest market in the ag land business, and there's an abundance of those out there. They're buying when it makes sense to them economically. And so when this market turns around to that point where they're confident they'll be able to sell the grapes, they'll be buyers.
So there's activity, and the market is changing. It's in flux right now, and we've still got to find that point of equilibrium. We'll get there. But this, straight from the horse's mouth, Tony Correa, that's what's happening with prices and land right now. Back to the studio. Thanks, Tony, for that cheery message. We're in a cycle, and this is a little bit of a different cycle than we're used to, because unlike previous cycles that were driven by speculation from vineyards that were chasing growth and demand, this one's the opposite. It's we're having shrinking demand by volume, and now it's like we were planted to the right amount, and now with especially the 2018, we're stuck with too much. We got to work through this 2018 crop. It's not that the industry is falling apart. Look at a couple slides real quick. Let's look at slide 10, predicted year-end sales growth. And our surveys run in October, and what you can see by change in dollar sales or change in case sales, 10% change in dollar sales, 8% change in case sales. Now the reality is, everybody is always about 2% high when you look at the final numbers. It's been pretty consistent that the industry is a little overly optimistic. This is the chart that a lot of people like to see. This is an agglomeration of financial statements over a pretty long period of time. And with this slide, what you're actually seeing is increasing gross margins over a very long period of time, which is reflective of more direct-to-consumer sales over time. So gross margins improve, but if you can look down toward the bottom there, pre-tax profit is it's kind of been cut in half over the last year. So pre-tax profit isn't as good. So the next question that comes up all the time is, what about M&A? We covered it in the report just a bit. Have a listing of a bunch of different sales over the year, and M&A on the winery side is it's off about 45% year over year. We expected that it was going to be off, and in talking to the folks in the middle of M&A, it should probably kind of hover in this area through 2020. I would expect. There are some deals. I'm looking at some deals right now for acquisitions. It's not like they're going away entirely, but in many cases, the acquisitions are more. I should say, not in a majority, but in many cases, there are people that are holding on to assets. Maybe they held on a little too long, and now they want out. It's not the right time to sell. The other side of it is the vineyard side. Tony talked a lot about pieces of that, and as it relates to vineyards, talk about price. You might not be able to get the price that you wanted unless you're in a premier site. You'll keep that price for sure. B properties, C properties, not as much. So it's just, again, as part of the cycle, we've got to take some stuff out of the ground first, whether that's fallowing, whether that's replanting early. It's going to depend upon the region that you find yourself. You look at the Paso area, and there's been a fair amount of removals already. Some are actually, I'm understanding, being replanted to pistachios already. I didn't think that they had pistachios in the region, but got to plant to something. Some are just being taken out and fallowed. I worry a little more about Sonoma County, especially the smaller growers. If you are trying to fallow as a small grower, it's rather difficult if you have bank debt, because the bank's not going to want to let you take your vineyard out. Really, that's a source of cash flow to repay that loan. So even though it might make financial sense, that's a difficult one. So. We might have some harder conversations in the bank business with some of those growers over the next year or two, depending upon what the strategy is. Not terrible, but we have work to do, and we've got to get through this. Sadly, in the North Coast, we don't really have whether it's Sonoma, Napa, Lake, or Mendocino, we don't have options for other crops. You don't plant pistachios in the hills. It's just the way it is. And we've already been through prunes and chickens and turkeys and cattle and pears and over the 40 years that I've been in the business in the North Coast, we've been through all those, and they've gone off to less expensive areas. So it's a little bit more difficult of a decision, in my opinion. But we'll work together and find a way. Juliana, I bet you have some thoughts.
Yeah, so you mentioned a little back about DTC, and there's continual growth there, even if at a slower rate. So last week we talked a little more generally about marketing to new generations, marketing wine online, best ways to sell wine online. So I know we had a lot of questions about, well, how do I do it? So Paul, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about best practices, smartest ways to use digital tools and data for wineries to sell their products online. How do they target? How do they find the right consumers? And what are some ways they can start implementing best practices in that way?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. I think that there's a couple pieces of that. I think that we are so focused on the new customer acquisition that we don't spend enough time on servicing and retaining the customers that come in through the front doors.
Nurturing those that are already with us.
It's less expensive, it's higher ROI, and I think our fortunate benefit of the tourism that we get in every single valley, whether it's in Livermore or Napa, Sonoma, has us looking to the new customer as opposed to the retention, because we just get more and more new ones. I think that from a best practices standpoint, obviously it goes back to, like I said last week, culture, hiring, getting the right tools. But it also means starting small. Everyone was looking for the optimal solution to swing for the fences, bring it down to small bite-sized pieces and build success on top of those bite-sized pieces. And I think we're trying to do a little bit every day. And Amy had this great thing last night. She says, if you make 1% improvement every week, it was every week. By the end of the year, you've made a lot of improvement.
Absolutely.
Right?
And it seems a lot easier to do it little by little than to say, it's the whole, you talk
Right.
about weight, right? Everyone's got something, it's New Year, everyone's trying to get healthy again, and everyone says, I want to get trim, I want to lose 10 pounds. Think about it, I want to lose 10 pounds, sounds daunting. If you say, I want to lose an average of 1 pound every month, by the end of the year, you'll get to your goal, and it's much more, possible by saying, okay, I'm just not going to have that venti caramel macchiato with the extra sauce. Instead, I'm just going to drink a black coffee, right? Right there, you do that consistently every day. You're at your goal by the end of the year. So it is small bites that are digestible.
Over time.
We also recommend all the time experiment and try something new and measure. And try it once, measure. If it wasn't effective, you don't have to do it again. You're not locked into it.
But I think that your point about trying it once, you don't just try it once and done. You have to try it to figure out what's broken about it. Because oftentimes in the wine industry, we'll try it once and we'll throw it away. Like that fulfillment house didn't work. That e-commerce strategy. Social media doesn't work. Twitter didn't get the campaign I wanted. These are when you do one swing and you don't.
I tried email. I didn't get a response. I went back to snail mail.
Right.
You had some questions about data, though. I mean, data sounds like a very big thing. I think we need to really get to the small part of data and just slicing and dicing, and I say that in a really kind way, is like putting our customers into different buckets and treating them differently. And there's huge ROI in dividing them up. The best customers get treated like this. The ones that hardly buy get treated like this. Communication strategies, all of that stuff. And that doesn't cost a lot of money. And I'll go to like a very basic example. If you picked up the phone and called the top 25 customers once a year as a winery owner on the phone, you would have an increase in success. You don't have to sell them, just say thank you. And then also call the people that came new into that 25 and talk to them different, or the ones that fell out of that top 25. So maybe a call of 50 people total.
Right. You're right, because those people that feel appreciated, engaged, and recognized are more likely to come back and re-engage with you. So it doesn't have to be a call to say, hey, I have a deal for you. It's not about trying to lower price points and fire sale things, but instead it's about that relationship building and meeting them where they are.
You can do it on social media too. It's not just phone and email these days. They posted a picture of your wine. Share it to your page. It's free content, and they'll love being featured on your brand's page.
We focus on social media so much about push marketing and just and polluting the airwaves. Really, it should be about the engagement. Customers are calling, talking to them.
It's a two-way conversation. We talked about, I think, a couple years ago in one of the D2C surveys that we had done. It's about being open to understand. It's not just a, like you said, push of information out there that causes people to say, oh, let me just get all I can. But really, it's about listening and learning to one another, looking across categories, looking and figuring out where trends are so that we can trial some of the things that are working in other areas. The thank you economy, the, air of gratitude, which is very relevant across every generation today, and putting that to work in your business. And it makes a difference.
It's a customer-centric approach, honestly.
Absolutely.
I mean, have you ever seen the celebrities read mean tweets?
Yes.
On the Jimmy Kimmel show, right?
Yeah.
I would love to see wineries read their Twitter, Instagram feed and see how ridiculous it sounds for them, or just answer the phone like they're reading their Twitter feed and see how absurd it is, as opposed to like thinking, talking, and having a conversation.
Absolutely. You have to speak the right language, especially if you're trying to reach a new generation and a younger consumer. Be conversational, share information, teach them and show them the attributes you want to about your brand, and engage them as well. I think that's key.
Again, I'm going to bump against this trope about younger consumers. It's
all consumers.
It's all consumers.
Sure.
Rob uses social media as well. I mean, and I'm saying that you're a boomer, and
I use email.
Yeah, exactly.
It's social.
Rob's great at Twitter. Rob does a good job engaging on that piece. I think we all use these platforms, and that's really the core that we're missing, is that digital is part of our culture. And we ignore it at our own peril, whether it's younger generations, whether it's Gen X, or whether it's boomers, or even.
And maybe we can frame it up in a way that seems more relatable across everybody across our industry of wine. Wine inherently is a product that brings people together.
Yes.
It's about connectivity. It's a beverage that is not a solo activity, but with food and as part of conversation and engagement. And digital gives you the opportunity to then be that same engaging, hospitable, warm, and caring brand in the place where the consumer is, whether that's at their home, at a party, or picking up the phone and giving them some appreciation.
We have one of the few consumer good products, to your point, that is a marriage of consumable luxury products, but hospitality layered over the top of it in a way that's almost uniquely wine. It's not the same in spirits or beer, and we exude that so well when you get to us. but we don't do a good job
Great
exuding
point.
it in communication cycles, in our customer service when they go away.
Yeah, you don't have to just wait till they come to visit you
Yeah.
at the winery to do it, but you can outreach through these many channels, omni-channels, or coming into the market and engaging with them.
I think one thing you can do also is create other mouthpieces for your brand. It doesn't always have
Sure.
to be yourself.
Agreed.
That's the trade, that's Psalms
sure.
and beverage directors. Engage with them. Invite them to your winery for a weekend. Treat them as well, like your customers, as well as social
are our
media
customers.
influencers.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
So
as you
don't
said,
leave
then
them
you can
out of the
use-
equation.
Then you can use that data and social and digital to amplify their message around your brand as well. And that third-party endorsement actually has higher readability
Yep.
on
Absolutely.
the how a consumer then consumes it, to say it's
Definitely.
important to me, not because the brand said it about themselves, but because someone I trust said it about the brand.
Earned media is
Yep.
always better than
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So.
This last year, I was asked to sit in and judge senior projects for Notre Dame University. They happened to pick the wine industry.
I was there with you.
That's
remember?
right, you were.
We were there together.
That's right.
I was invisible.
That's right. Except you were right next to me.
Yeah, I was right next to him. I was,
Well, easy to forget.
Yeah, and one of the takeaways that I had from that was the lateral communication. As these guys were, trying to figure out whatever their strategy was, one idea that I thought was actually a good one that I hadn't focused on. And Paul, you might have a tactical solution to it, but it's this notion of clubs and creating a way so that you can have lateral communication amongst club members. And I recognize as the students were going through these presentations, the strength of that kind of an opportunity. We're all looking for recommendations from non-wine writers, as an example, from your friends. We all recognize the strength of that. And I don't think it's a chat room, but I do recognize that, as an example, if I have friends, let's just presume Amy is my friend.
Oh, wow. I just got a high status. Promote it again. Promote it again.
If Amy and I like going to, this is just a placeholder for a larger discussion, but if we like going to an event at a winery, and she knows I like that, we both like that event, it's going to be really hard for me to break away from that club because it's something that we enjoy together, right? And all of that starts to flow out of this lateral communication. So finding ways in clubs to enhance that lateral communication. You got a solution?
So what they saw, actually, which was really obvious to us if we say it, is that they saw that the wine clubs are communities. And they were trying to apply natural community management because they're younger and they're digital. So, community management is part of, a Facebook group or something like that. And they're trying to enable that cross-community communication because right now wine clubs are in isolation. They don't. We're not enabling them to be a community or a club. To be honest,
Think about it.
You're
It's
not
like
giving them
Nike did it
platform.
really well with runners,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
They not only had the macro community of, I like to run and I'm on this platform because I own my Nikes and I'm tracking my fitness. However, they then were able to, geolocate people and put those people in touch with one another. So you not only were doing it on the digital space, but you could also then meet up with others that had the same interest, to your point, that then make you more committed to that activity. Because the more points of interaction, the more.
Let me speak to that really quick because that's
loyal.
really important. It goes back to your data question. Is finding those communities are just about tying geographies together or behavioral people that do it.
Yeah.
And we have a problem actually in wine. We have a few problems. One of them is our California addiction. I mean, if you actually look at the DTC data from almost every Napa, Sonoma, Paso, every winery in California, we're feeding almost solely off our California population as opposed to going to New York and Illinois. And we do get some of those in there, especially in Napa. But we have a problem with that. We need to start looking how we take wine and get the person in Boston to buy it, or the person in Austin, or the person in Chicago, or New Orleans.
It's back to the taking the show on the road, and it's also applying metrics to that. And I'll give you an example. One of my customers one day said to me he was going on a trip and he was going to check in with, I don't remember how many houses and have tasting. And he said, no, I was going to do 13, it's going to be 12, and I'm always asking questions. Well, why is it 12? And he said, well, because we went from 40 to 39 attendees at that house. And it seems like a lot of people to me. And his answer to me was, well, not really. He said the real issue here is if I have 38 people, let's use the easier math, 40 people, there's only 20 couples. if there's only 20 couples, then we end up with a certain amount that are already in the club. I'm only going to be able to get a certain amount, and if once I drop below 40, then I'm done. So I just cancel it, and I kind of went hallelujah, honestly, because here's somebody that was, and very successful, by the way, but doing the outreach, hitting the streets, taking the experience on the road. In this case, it was just tasting at a house. There's lots of other ideas, but then they were applying metrics to success on the events.
Right.
I think it's fundamental. I'm concerned about this trend of wine on the road. I mean, every winery is leaning into it right now, and don't get me wrong, it's one of the right approaches for sure. Where you look where there's either clusters of customers or the void of where you want to grow customers in a region.
It's harder.
It's harder, but there's great examples of ways to do that. But I think that we also need to look beyond that and other ways to reach out to customers that we can actually target them, whether it's through social media.
It's integrated.
Whether it's an integrated marketing.
It's not just about, as I say, it's a placeholder for large.
And that's what I'm saying, because like everyone keeps hearing this wine on the road, and what I see actually over the last year is the amount of road shows that are being built for wineries or DTC is exploding. And good. And good.
But that can't be the
I would add that they're
can't be the end of the
extremely
discussion, right? And in the same way that a decade ago or more, I started to talk about experience, that wine, we're not selling chemicals in a bottle. We're selling experience. And I think the industry, whether it's me or other people that were leading people to inclusion, I think the industry had kind of misinterpreted it to say, oh, it's about the experience in the tasting room. And I never meant that.
No.
But there is an experience. There is everything that you do at a winery creates some experience, and it's going to be a different experience if you're at the winery versus somewhere else.
Right.
But you've got to create that.
Have you heard of the Rosé Mansion? Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Have you heard of the Rosé Mansion?
I have. Yeah, it was.
You probably went to it. You live in New York.
never went to it, but those things are extremely costly. I was going to add that taking your experience on the road, and we plan events all the time, it's extremely expensive. Most wineries couldn't do one event in a year for the budget that those kinds of things cost. So there are more cost-effective ways to tap into communities. Vivino is a great example. There's wine lovers on Vivino that are scanning wine labels every day. They're rating their wines. They're commenting on the wines they're drinking. Tap into those digital platforms. It's going to cost you a lot less money than picking up your team, going on the road, getting a venue, getting staff. All of that is extremely costly. So I think there's other ways to look for those communities digitally as well.
I agree with you.
I was just going to say, and I would say that the important part of what you were talking about, Rob, is that we actually need to, number one, know what matters in any of these experiences so that we can measure what matters. Yep. And I think to your point, if you're going to put a big budget together and you're going to do some elaborate, road show and activity, the question you should be asking yourself before you commit to those dollars is, what actions and or interactions do I need that will show that this is repeatable and scalable so that it will impact the brand in an ongoing way and not just be a break-even activity.
And you have to integrate different pieces. So you go and take that consumer event on the road,
Absolutely.
Get retailers in the area to carry the wine and have a card at the event where you can buy this wine in the area. Integrate different pieces that'll help improve the effectiveness of that activation, because we're going to spend the money on it. So.
But I think that's, Paul, how do we know what data matters, and how do we really start to understand those consumer journeys at each different point of segmentation? So to your point from earlier, we know that it's very hard to get a new person into the category of wine, but when somebody's already engaged in wine in general or already engaged with your brands, in order to build their loyalty and their interaction with you and purchase and lifetime value, that's where the real unlocking comes to the individual profitability within the winery.
Let's go for a second to switch up, if I might just try off something you said, Amy. Slide 15, if we can pull that up, please, Teresa.
Slide 15.
Love the seltzer.
Yeah, we really didn't talk about this.
No law with the claw.
This is hard seltzer, spike seltzers, whatever you want to call them, the growth rate, and people ask about it. Is this a substitute? Is it a gateway? Is this wine coolers from years past? And generally, most people will look at this and say, no, this is a takeaway. And in fact, the early data that we're seeing right now from multiple sources suggests that a lot of these consumers of this beverage are actually coming from the wine category. You know, a little bit surprised, but that's the early read on it. As I've been thinking through spiked seltzers, you know, I've thought about other booms over the years. For instance, you know, wine coolers that drove into the young consumers at that time, the boomers, drove the category, and then after that, Moscato, and then, as I said, they kind of went to spirits, and then after that, we end up with red blends, and I thought Gallo did a commendable job and has done a commendable job with their entry. It's
Apothic.
Red.
Yeah.
Thank you. And so, you know, that was, you know, another kind of a boom, but we haven't seen that same response in growth rate in the wine business. And we brought up this slide, but if we can go to slide 12 again, I think it's an important one to resurface. With wine today, the competition isn't just foreign wine. It's not your neighbor, although it is. It's really beer and spirits, and largely it's spirits instead of beer. That's the competition today. And so when we're thinking about where the entry points are for new consumers, I'm not sure I'm that disappointed with White Claw. I'm not sure I'm that disappointed with spiked seltzers, because if people are trading, as all the data indicate, if they're trading out between beer and spirits and wine, or you know, amongst those categories, any kind of a move, if it's bringing in people into the alc bev category, will benefit everybody. So as some of the questions that came up, and I thought that's an important one to go over. And I started to mention this in the last one as well, but you know, I don't think that we're going to see a product actually be the gateway and rescue us. And so if we're waiting for that young consumer, just like the boomers, you know, to go through wine coolers and then step into wine and, you know, and resurrect the thing, I hear this consistently. You know, the young consumer's too young. They don't have the money. They're not going to be able to do this. And my response is, it really doesn't matter. If we're just going to wait, if that's our strategy, hope's not a strategy, not a good one. I'm still can be hopeful, but in fact, you know, we've got to do something besides that.
What do you think about products like bourbon barrel aged wine? That was a big trend, you know, a few years ago. Things that cross different categories. I saw a brand recently. It's very millennial driven in its packaging. It's marketing low ABV, and it's a vermouth. So products like that somewhat cross these boundaries themselves as entry points for anyone, you know, regardless of demographic.
I think we do have to pay attention to the health and wellness, and you know, it's interesting. I know this again, back to the spirits guys, but Kettle One is a really good example.
The botanicals.
Yeah. So, you know, Kettle One was doing okay, but once they reinvigorated their brand by calling it botanicals, it just kind of went through the roof because of, you know, this notion of health and plant-based again, you know.
And again, that's looking at,
Vodka.
as we talked about last week, that's really about looking at the greater trends that are out there and what consumers are looking for in order to feel a sense of belonging, connectivity, and so that we have insight into their value set, right? And health and wellness is one of them. And being, you know, you mentioned it a lot last week, Juliana, it's about the transparency. And what does transparency and authenticity mean today?
Right.
It doesn't mean that I necessarily have to have all of the, from the soil up through a, you know, privately held entity that then has a, you know, erected tasting room there. But instead, it's just that I'm being honest about the type and style of wine and engagement that I'm offering you. And that's why a lot of these wine clubs and brands that exist solely in digital actually are successful in selling.
There's different, there's trial. I mean, there's a whole different, so to Rob's point though, we either eat ourselves for growth or we have to eat into other categories. That's fundamental in that piece. I do have questions about, you know, we keep chasing this younger generation as if it's an onboarding piece, and I'm not sure that that's right or not wrong. I don't have an answer for that. I don't think anyone does. But we do know, and Joe Fattorini from The Wine Show did this great presentation about the behaviors of people that drink wine arrive at some point in their life, usually when they have kids or at home. So that is an onboarding, and maybe we're targeting too much, trying to go downstream so far instead of waiting to when they're ready to be home and they have some affluence and saying that fits in your lifestyle in this way. We talk about all this base.
I hear what
Right.
you're saying, but I do have a bit of
Yeah, you have inside
skepticism about that, only because what
As
we
do I.
recognize is
Yeah.
the younger and the new consumer that's not engaged completely with us, Juliana
Right.
talked about it last week as well, is already allocating their very limited funds to
Sure.
higher end luxury and experiential activities. And they don't want to have a house and necessarily want to start a family and have these kids. So if we're waiting for a life stage that was one that we
Sure.
saw a greater engagement in wine before from past generations, I don't think we can count on that either
Agreed on
as an opportunity to say. It is good to understand when they're getting there. We need to be able to meet them at that point,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure we can wait.
I
That's
agree.
where
You're right. So what you're saying is like there's a huge cohort that's not moving into that family home ownership.
Absolutely.
But the
Right.
cohort that is, we're not targeting that cohort as
Agreed.
well. So
Agreed.
there's a
We
co-
talked
there's a
about
dual.
it. We talked about it in the report for a while now, which is the indulgence gap.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so, if we wait, the hope is that they will have more money and they will pay more. But that gap that we're going to have to go through as an industry
That's ouchy.
is painful. That means more vineyard removals. That means more people going out of business.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's the destruction of capital. And
Agreed.
And so
The bank doesn't like it.
nobody likes it. As a person who loves this industry,
Of course.
I just want to see better for us.
Absolutely.
And so it really does mean taking advantage of the opportunity. The opportunity that's ahead of us is this large young consumer. I get tired of talking about it, honestly, but the industry is still not taking advantage of the opportunity.
Well, the opportunity is not
If we
just
could
the
go
young
to,
customer.
I'm sorry, just a second. Could we go to slide 21, because I think it underscores just a little bit about what we've been saying. This is a new set of information that SipSource is. It's a group of distributors essentially that are putting their data together and creating this information. And what you can see is, growth rate in spirits is positive. And that's on-premise and off-premise. That's grocery and restaurant. And then you can see what's happened with wine over, the last couple of years. And on-premise and off-premise wholesale depletions by volume are negative. So at the same time, we see growth in the spirits category, and that's alcohol. We are seeing negative growth in wine, which is alcohol. So you've got to say to yourself, what's the difference? And there's several differences. One is the way they market. Another is price. Wine is 2 times more expensive as spirits per serving. There's different ways to look at it, but it's more expensive. Now, my recommendation isn't that we all drop our lead price. I mean, that's not the solution. But we've got to come up with solutions to address price. We've got to come up with solutions to address trial. We've got to become relevant to that young consumer. And here's one other thing that gives me a lot of hope. There are 2 data points. They're okay data points, and I won't say who they're from yet. You may know out there, but I'd like to see more is the reason I'm being hesitant. But there are 2 data points that suggest that the young consumer is, when they do buy, they're buying the most expensive bottle.
Yep.
And it doesn't mean they're buying the most. Unlike, there's reports from a while ago that were talking about, a lot of wine that the young consumer is buying is just not true. But they are buying the most, in these 2 separate reports from totally different sources, the biggest bottle when they do buy, the most expensive bottle when they do buy. And that's really interesting to me, because what that says to me is that they are into buying these for gifts and for special occasions. So when they put a nice bottle of wine out as a gift, when they put it at, when they bring it to a party for a special occasion, what is that telling you? It's telling me that we got a young consumer that actually aspires to this category.
That's
Right.
That they recognize it as a special thing. They have the everyday kind of spirits that they can put in their house and share with friends or whatever.
White Claw.
But it's a special thing. Now it's also there's a negative to it, because this is the way the wine industry got into its problems before, is, and we had, matter of fact, a very long advertising campaign that it was about wine, what are you saving it for? Because we recognized as an industry that wine was being used for special occasions instead of being used every day. We wanted to increase that frequency. So we really don't want to go back there, but I do like that data point that says the young consumer is buying these expensive bottles, and they do behave that way. They save their money for certain things, right? And then they parachute in, or however you do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
May I pose a question to you?
Absolutely.
I hear you saying that, and I don't disagree by any means.
Yes,
but like,
you do.
I don't.
I know.
But I mean,
I know this lead in.
but there's a whole generation, and there's two of us sitting at the table that have affluence, and the targeting of us is not happening at all on a Gen X basis. And I mean, if we want sustainability through that indulgence gap, we need to connect with the Gen X who have the revenue, the means to buy these products, and we have to connect with them, not forcing them to come to the winery to taste us, but at their home. And we keep saying that over and over again, but we keep leapfrogging this generation that's right in front of us that will help sustain us through that next gap. And we're jumping right to the millennial. And I'm not saying I love millennials, by the way. Some of my best friends are millennials. No, but I'm looking at the economics of it, which is these people have the money.
Absolutely.
Why are we not talking about them?
Well, at the same time,
we have
Paul, you mentioned earlier that when we talk about tools to market, whether it's health, that boomers, Gen X also respond to those messages.
Yes.
So if we make that argument, we are thinking of ways to reach not just millennials, but we're actually looking at just reaching consumers overall with different tactics, whether it's health or wellness or consumption occasions. So if you go back to that approach of looking at marketing to all generations.
Well, those are all macro concepts that are happening in the health process. What I'm saying is the micro concepts of like when we're doing direct targeting to people, how we're doing our advertising, showing people of our age that are doing that.
Yeah.
So it's really fascinating.
We have to change. And we talked about this, I think, in the last show, that we need to have people in the tasting room with sleeves and gauges. That
You're getting engaged soon, right?
Yes. But they represent the people that are buying their wine. We can't just leave in my generation in the tasting room because we have free time on our hands. That's nice, but
the concept of you can't be what you can't see, right? Whether that's about who and what you end up being in life, or how you engage in your lifestyle. That it is that representation when you walk in.
I agree with Paul about the targeting, especially on a micro basis. I'd also say that the data that I see shows that the growth that we are having in segments is all due to Gen X. So in some respects, we are doing the right thing because we are seeing some success.
What's happening is what we said. They're living in their life stage, and we waited for them to get here. But I think that it's not just about Gen X. It's also the diversity of culture. I mean, Hispanic drinkers, we've still never tapped. African-American drinkers, we still haven't tapped. There's a whole, again, blue ocean, like we said last week, to explore and test and find out how these people will respond to wine culturally, because those are the growing U.S. population is changing.
I think for marketing, what we really need to find out is why did that person, Gen X or millennial, purchase that $45 bottle of wine? What was the decision and the decision-making factors behind that purchase? And then try to target in there. For example, there's an online sales platform that goes heavy into content and video, and that's how they sell product. Is that the right way to do it, or do you go more short form? Do you go with partnerships and advertising, like finding out exactly what's making these people tick to make that final consumption?
And it'll be different for the different person at different price points, at different age groups.
So understanding of the consumers by a micro segmentation and recognizing it's not one.
I think the industry is the larger industry, I should say, the heavier production wineries have. I know this for a fact now because of a presentation that I was involved with in early December, and we had representation from roughly 23 of the largest wineries, and I was encouraged by the viewpoint. They recognize the problem. They recognize where we've been lacking. They recognize that our marketing is off. In the past, some of the things that have driven the category higher have been the larger wineries that do have the money to advertise on a mass media basis. And I've been kind of waiting for that. And there's a small little piece of Joe Gallo was quoted in the press release from Gallo when they were talking about the purchase of the 30-odd brands from Constellation. And he said, part of the goal is to increase the category. And so it was a very small thing. Nobody ever talked about it, but I was kind of like, yes.
No, we're all rooting for that to be
great.
the case, because as we talked about, the pie either continues to shrink, we're stealing from other alc bev. We really do need to continue to figure out how are we going to actually grow the landscape.
Yeah, what's the messaging going to be? We talked a little bit in the first show about the use of natural, to talk more about wine is natural. So there's some marketing things that have to happen. I know in the background, Amy and I are working together on some programs with others in the industry to try to see if we can pull some things together. MJ Dale's been at the center point of organizing all that from Inventions. Tip my hat to her for the effort that she's put in there. But I know that the industry is aware, and it is again part of the reason that I'm so optimistic right this second. People look at the report and they go, oh, it's pretty pessimistic. And I don't think we can make change until we can all say, yeah, there's a problem and this is what it is. And I do feel as an industry that's where we are. When this industry aligns, historically it has always turned things around. It might take a while, but I do think we're going to turn around. I think whether you are a large producer, a small producer, a grower, a distributor, a cork manufacturer, bottle maker, if volumes are shrinking, every single one of those categories, every single one of those participants in it is sagging, and they're going to struggle. So I think you talked about collaboration earlier about.
Yeah, I mean, it's just an important part of what we all need to recognize, right? That while you obviously need to be building strength and health within your own individual winery and or, vineyard because you're a grower on that side of it,
collect everybody
we do
up.
need to recognize the strength that we have as wine, as only a portion of alc bev, so that we can build some momentum. So it's, it's again, not just one thing or another or a multitude of tiny, Band-Aids and tactical fixes, but instead stepping back for a moment and recognizing where can the wave of change actually start, because as you've been showing for a couple of years, we're seeing deceleration of growth, we're seeing continued less and less engagement, and how are we going to actually bring that to a halt and then be able to pivot back into the momentum to be in our favor to really re-engage the industry?
Yeah. We're down to about 10 minutes or so. It always goes unbelievably fast.
Jeez.
But Paul, you probably have a few other questions. We had by the way, the questions that we've been getting both before the telecast and then during the telecast have been pretty impressive.
Terrific.
Really drilled in questions. People, show that they understand the problem. You don't see people complaining as much as trying to really look for solutions. I think we're through that barrier of, identification. I mentioned identification of the problem. There's a process you have to go through where it's, okay, here's the problem. No, it's not. Well, maybe it is. Oh, yeah, there's an example. Okay, yeah, we have a problem, right? That takes a period of time, and I think we're through that. But Paul, you have a question there that we can take on?
Let me find one. Give me just 1 second. I know that Amy has a couple queued up as well from yesterday.
I have a question about slide 22 about off-prem growth below.
Great.
$9.
No,
I'm just curious if there's an opportunity within that category. I mean, we've seen it going down and declining, obviously, according to this, but to embrace a new consumer, get entry, is there an opportunity there?
I think as Rob alluded to with the transaction of the Constellation pieces of the portfolio over to Gallo, my guess would be that Gallo has a good strategy in play in hand because it is not only good for them but good for the total industry to be able to figure out how to halt that decline and be able to use it as that point of engagement and taste trial, which they have led traditionally over many years.
Yeah.
So
and I actually,
we're all watching it pretty close.
And I actually, given the fact we have oversupply right now, we got to figure out what to do with this juice. And the traditional approach, and the approach that will happen, is that we'll take good wine and we'll sell it down into the next tier.
Yep.
And so my expectation kind of is that we might see a reversal of, right around $9 or $10. We might see volume actually, pick up a bit there because we're going to have price come down. Now, is that sustainable? it depends what we do with if those are new consumers that are coming into the category. That's really what it depends on. And I don't know that that's the solution, but it may be part of a solution.
It's just a big encouragement of some pantry stocking of the current core consumers. We don't get much out of it except for deep discounts. I do think there is a big opportunity.
I'm pantry stocking myself, by the way, right now.
I do think that there is a really good opportunity for that, and I think we're all cheering, Gallo along with this acquisition because they've done such a good job over so many decades in really being a great point of entry and recognizing how to find those consumers. But it's not just up to Gallo, right? I mean, we all have to recognize, as we've been talking about, what are the ways that we can activate and motivate across all generations, but there's consumers to engage with us in the first place, as you said, Paul, which is the expensive thing to do. But then once they're with us, how do we actually increase their usage and identification of being a active part of the wine community?
To your point, getting them across the line to engage with the wine, but it's different levels of engagement. Whether it's a bottle a year or 9 bottles a year, right?
Well,
So
we have a large cohort of the millennials, as Rob talked about earlier, that are willing to pay, a lot of money for very infrequent purchases. How do we then make them feel more comfortable and part of the total wine community so that they want it to be, again, a consistent and, continuous part of a healthy and balanced lifestyle?
So Rob, I have a good question here for you. So they said, Rob, you've spoken before how the wine industry needs to take a page out of the spirits playbook. Do you see this being more of a consumer or brand-focused endeavor, and what would you consider the key call-outs?
Health and wellness, brand-focused. There.
Nice.
I would add, we saw that one slide 21, where we saw that both spirits and on and off premise are showing high depletions that are still growing, while on premise is decelerating, it's still showing growth. And I would say you got to dig a little deeper into health and wellness. It's really about being able to identify the key messages, right? People that still want to consume alc bev but are on a keto diet, they don't have an option right now that's knowable to them in the wine category because of the sugar
Because we
content.
don't talk about it.
So they immediately go to spirits, and there's kind of a keto list.
Or we don't even
of
talk about
approved.
it. We don't even talk about whether there's, or we hide the fact that
How can we use the language
and
that identifies?
We don't want to talk about the fact that we actually have calories. It's one of the things that I talked about in the report was I just find it fascinating that one of the top beverages in bars is Tito's vodka and soda, because Tito's vodka is the best thing ever, obviously, but there's no carbs and the soda has no calories. So, the rumor is that it's the least caloric beverage at the bar. So it's part of what's driving that. And so how much is in a glass of wine? How many calories in a glass of wine? And the answer is, you don't know. You don't know. You'll start asking the questions. I would, just so I'm right. Is it red wine or is it white wine? Well, what is a serving? But
Depends who you are.
but it's not. We've been hiding from calories. We don't want to talk about calories, and there's some reasons why. There's some things we've got to go across. For instance, vintage to vintage variation. How as expensive is it going to be to actually figure out how many calories are in a serving? What is a serving? So some boundaries that we've got to come across. We got to cross.
Opportunities for collaboration within the industry so we can standardize, so that people that are seeking that information that do want to get involved but are hesitant because we're not giving them the data they want.
That's right.
So there's a lot of talk about off-premise conversations, package size. We haven't had much conversation about on-premise and about our decline in on-premise, and that trial comes through on-premise, and in fact that's the largest tasting room in the world. Is all the restaurants. And we go into on-premise a little bit?
That's a place where we do need collaboration in some form or fashion, because we're way too expensive in the bar. I mean, we know what prices are, and we had a lovely dinner last night, and Amy was sorting down we assigned her the task, and she sorted down the wine list, and she says, "That's too expensive. That's too expensive." And we've all been in that spot in the bars. We think as industry, I hear this consistently, well, we're going to take our excess wine and we're going to put it into a buy the glass program. If it's excess, I'm actually kind of okay with that. But when there is not an excess, what we do is we reverse engineer our grape purchases to create a lower priced wine, and then we're saying that we're using that for trial for a consumer to come in and recognize who we are. And it's not doing that. We're having a worse quality wine representing our brand. I'm not saying it's bad. We all make great wine. Let's just say that right now.
I think one way. Oh, sorry.
No, I was going to. But to finish, that whole strategy of buy the glass isn't going to drive, and it's obviously not driving demand. It's not even driving demand in the restaurants.
Right.
Price is a big deal in the restaurants when you can find it in the grocery store, and then when you can find it. I mean, the other big disconnect is when your consumers come into your tasting room and they look online, they find out how much you're priced at, and then they go somewhere else, or the grocery store, wherever, and they find it a lot less. That's a little bit messy too.
Yeah, that's a different problem, I think. But I have a huge question about that, because I think we, growing up in wine, knew that brands were generally built for higher end brands on premise, and off premise was where you build your volume brands, right, on that piece, or you trial them in on premise and then. It's something that we really need to find a new place with.
Broken.
Yeah,
I
well,
think you
but
can-
we can't. Oh, sorry. Go
No,
ahead.
I would say just treat your accounts just similar to my point earlier about, you identifying communities, treat your accounts as marketing vehicles. And I think you have to add value to get people to spend more. So maybe that's creating a dinner series concept where the winemaker flies out and hosts a group and talks to them about the product, but create some added value within that on-premise space that's going to make them spend that extra money on the product.
And that dovetails nicely into what I was going to say about the fact that on-premise itself is struggling to get consumers. We have to remember that the number of people actually going into an establishment to eat a meal has been on a strong decline. Thank you, DoorDash and Uber Eats and
fast casual,
Postmates
fast
and,
casual
right,
as well.
So we still, as an industry, have not unlocked how could we become part of that purchase if there's larger and growing numbers of consumers that are ordering their meals from on-premise establishment, but having them delivered to home. And when alcohol, and wine specifically, can't be part of that transaction, then where are we left?
That was a big question,
So
actually.
it's,
One of the things
two
about how
problems.
does DoorDash partner with us in these problems, and I think that we don't know yet.
And we're going to have to
Exactly.
save that because we are once again out of time.
Oh, geez.
I love these conversations. I hope you guys enjoy them as well. I always learn things. And what I take away from the State of the Industry report this year is we have opportunity. We have opportunity because the industry is at a point of recognizing there is an issue, and they're ready to talk in straight terms and do something about it. We got to get everybody on the same bus. We got to get everybody moving in the same direction. We got to get everybody speaking the same language. Whether that is how we market, why we market, to who we market, to whom we market. Somebody help me with my grammar. In any case, we do have opportunity, I think, and I expect to see a lot of movement in a positive direction in the next year. But with that, I'd like to thank all my panel members.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Juliana,
Yeah.
Paul,
Thank you.
thank
Pleasure.
you. You can, a couple of closing things, you can immediately watch a replay of the videocast on the link that you were given for the live stream. So you have that in your hands, you can watch the replay. If you are interested in participating in the annual State of the Wine Industry Survey in the future, and please participate, there is a survey at the end of the videocast that you can fill out, and if your email is in that, then you will be invited to participate next year. With that, thank you very much for tuning in with us in this second installment of the 2020 State of the Industry videocast this year for Silicon Valley Bank. We've enjoyed entertaining you, I hope, and we look forward to the next time that we see you at Silicon Valley Bank.